1990 era began. No internet, no Facebook, no Twitter, no blogs, no emails, none of all that jazz. And looking back, I remember setting up the Anti-apartheid News as a matter of scissors and paste. Furthermore, there was no satellite television. And I can remember being in Zimbabwe for the independence celebrations in 1980, when the white adhesions, terrified of the anti-black propaganda it had booked everything up solid. Couldn't get a plane back out of Harare. Or Salisbury since then, who knows. The strange thing is, the BBC television paid a fabulous amount of money to buy first-class seats to get the film back from Zimbabwe to London so it could be edited and then sent out in the newsreels. Think of that nowadays. Nowadays we've got worldwide coverage with satellites. We've got digital mobile phones with not just sending pictures but sending videos. And these events can be beamed all over the world. There is no multiplicity of news channels such as there is nowadays, stretching from the BBC right through the spectrum to Al Jazeera. I still can imagine the stranglehold on news, which was available at the time of South Africa, that dictatorship. And there are many campaigners here this evening. Sadly, some of them are no longer with us. I mention only three. Trevor Huddleston, Mike Terry, Bella Pillay. And there are many people here who worked throughout the years, staff and volunteers, who worked their socks off, day and night, telephoning, writing letters, using old mangled typewriters, setting up networks of activists, organising local and national protests, public demonstrations, physical lobbying of members of Parliament both in London and in the constituencies. It was a tremendous job of work. How the hell did we do it? But we did it and we won. And that is what everyone else might say is the defining moment at the end of the day. It's my pleasure, first of all, to welcome our first guest this evening, the High Commissioner for South Africa, His Excellency Robin Raba, and I would like him to say a few words.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words. Indeed, I'll be very, very short because this is the function, this is the occasion to celebrate the work that was done on behalf of all South Africans, which put us where we are today. It's not an occasion for long speeches. I'm usually not a person who talks long speeches anyway. So my one is to say thank you so much for being here. You are most welcome. All of us, we have not forgotten the wonderful, extraordinary input and the role you played during the hard times when the future was very dark for South Africa. Today we're celebrating a 20-year freedom of our country, the democracy that was like a dream those days. But also today, as we all reflect and look back, we must be able to identify and walk the path that pushes development so that never again shall we go back to where we were those days. Africa and the continent of Africa has huge opportunities for development, have huge opportunities to address the three challenges that we face in our country, which is poverty, inequality, and unemployment. The opportunities that I'm talking about are found in the main in the developed countries like the UK and other countries. There are some industries that in South Africa or in Africa at large we have not even started looking into them. We need your support, we need your guidance, we need your partnership so that the democracy that we all fought for was not only a journey from the days of apartheid to the end of apartheid, but it must also be a journey from the end of apartheid to a brighter future for all the generations to come. Thank you once again. There is still a lot we can do together. You are most welcome in this building. It's your building. As you are friends of South Africa, it will always be part of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Next speaker is Professor Colin Bundy, Prominent Director of SOLAS, Vice Chancellor of WITS, University Principal of Green Capital College, Oxford. That's a mouthful, isn't it? He's going to tell us about the importance of understanding our history. Colin. The British anti-apartheid movement was, of course, important in its own right, and its history is splendidly served in this website. But I want to begin by remembering that it was in fact part of a much broader global movement. There were perhaps three instances in the 20th century of political mobilization and solidarity that crossed national frontiers, that bridged divides in local politics, that united generations, and won mass support from ordinary people. Three moments imbued with a sense of moral and historical urgency. The first of these was the international support for the Republican cause during the Spanish Civil War. For liberals and those on the left who lived through the 1930s, Eric Hobsbawm recalled, the anti-Franco commitment remained the only political cause which even in retrospect appears as pure and compelling as it did in 1936. Unquote. The second instance was the international opposition to the American war in Vietnam. Although it was shrouded in the veils of the Cold War, American aggression in Southeast Asia not only divided and demoralized the home front, but also enlisted a mass base of citizens in countries that might usually have been counted as American allies. And the third such moment, the one we are honoring today, began in the late 1950s and early 60s and peaked in the late 1980s. It was the wave of international opposition to white minority rule in South Africa and to the repugnant policies of apartheid. Anti-apartheid activism grew from the grassroots in many different localities, but it flowered into a genuinely global movement with popular support. In one country after another,
anti-apartheid activists protested, demonstrated and mobilized. They helped deepen the isolation of the South African regime, but importantly, they also shaped public opinion at home, impacting on the political culture of countries all over the world. The British anti-apartheid movement was the oldest, largest, and most active organisation within that global story. Britain, of course, had a long history of very close ties with South Africa. When the AAM was founded in 1959, Britain was far and away the largest trading partner and biggest investor in the apartheid economy. And this meant that for the next 30 years, the anti-apartheid movement in Britain was up against an establishment that had a big stake in South Africa, that protected South Africa at the United Nations, voted more often, used its veto more often than any other power in the Security Council. A country that breached the arms embargo and that remained hostile to the imposition of economic sanctions on apartheid right to the end. But if it could not change the policies of successive governments, the anti-apartheid movement succeeded in capturing the imagination and channeling the beliefs of hundreds of thousands of people in Britain. In the mid-1980s, the AAM became Britain's biggest ever international solidarity movement. Political parties, local government, trade unions, student unions, community groups, churches and individuals were drawn into a torrent of activism. People marched and demonstrated in cities across the British Isles. 200,000 of them signed a petition presented to Parliament. Others pressed British companies to disinvest. They picketed shops selling South African goods. They lobbied their MPs and local councillors. Trade unions blocked the export of machinery to the South African arms industry and refused to unload South African coal. In a single month in 1985, the anti-apartheid movement distributed 750,000 leaflets. And of course, right through the 1980s, the struggle in South Africa was personified in the person of its most famous prisoner of conscience. The anti-apartheid movement celebrated Mandela's 60th birthday in 1978, and this gesture rapidly swelled into a global campaign to free Nelson Mandela. In Britain, the 1980s saw an avalanche of awards and affirmations, the freedom of 9 cities, honorary degrees, innumerable streets, buildings, public spaces and facilities named for Nelson Mandela. Artists and poets and musicians honoured Mandela, and of course their contribution reached an extraordinary zenith in the Wembley Stadium in June 1988. A concert not only attended by 70,000 people, but broadcast to 63 other countries, watched and heard by an estimated 500,000 people. And a month later, there's a very fine picture of Desmond Tutu in Hyde Park on the actual eve of the birthday in July. The website being launched this evening recalls this history and makes it widely accessible. But let me be clear. This is not an exercise in nostalgia, but is a continuing project of reflection, of memory, and of taking history seriously. The anti-apartheid movement dissolved itself in October 1994, 5 months after South Africa's first democratic election, and bequeathed the new organisation, Action for Southern Africa, which exists today. But it also set up an anti-apartheid movement archives committee, which has played an extremely important role in ensuring that the records of this sustained solidarity struggle have been preserved, splendidly catalogued, and made available to scholars. The material on this website is drawn from the official archives held by the University of Oxford. The Archives Committee also organised a conference in 1999 assessing the history of the 40 years since the foundation. It mounted an exhibition at the Museum of London in 2009, and it has now won funding for this website. This not only allows scholars to investigate the history of anti-apartheid activism, but equally importantly, it allows people who were not involved, and especially younger people, to discover for themselves the creativity, the commitment, the idealism, and the beliefs of those who took part in this extraordinary social movement. Anybody using the website will be reminded that those who opposed racism and apartheid by every political means available to them began as a small pressure group on the fringes of British politics, but by the late 80s found themselves in the lead of a huge swathe of popular support for democratic forces in South Africa. That ordinary people can be mobilized around progressive political causes seems to me one of the most important legacies of the anti-apartheid movement. Finally, it's important to remember that the international solidarity movement opposed to apartheid always interacted with political developments in South Africa itself. So the waves of revulsion caused by the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, or the shooting of protesting school students in Soweto in 1976, galvanized activists in the UK and elsewhere. Similarly, in the 1980s, it was that rolling wave of urban protest in South Africa, led by the UDF, that inspired support here. And those influences moved in both directions. In February 1985, I was climbing Table Mountain. Those of you who know it, I was going up Clutterclip Gorge on a hot February day. Halfway up, city bowls spread beneath me. I was walking with my children, and suddenly we heard music. It came from a large portable radio cassette player, a boombox, carried in the rucksack of a young climber just above us. And the words rang out. Are you so blind you cannot see? I say, free Nelson Mandela, free Nelson Mandela. Thank you.